The last thing Blake Ramsey expected to find at his corporate headquarters on a Thursday night was the new marketing analyst still sitting at her desk, surrounded by color-coded files and half-empty coffee cups, working on a campaign he had already told her to abandon. He stood in the doorway of the open plan office, the silence of the empty building pressing against his ears. Most employees fled the moment the clock struck 6. It was nearly 11, and Mara Ellis was hunched over her laptop, her dark hair falling forward as she typed furiously, completely unaware of his presence. Blake had built Ramsey Industries from nothing. At 32, he owned the largest luxury hospitality empire in North America, with hotels spanning from Miami to Vancouver. He had clawed his way up from a childhood spent watching his single mother work 3 jobs, and he had learned early that sentiment was a liability. Business required logic, strategy, and the ability to cut losses without hesitation. 2 weeks ago, he had shut down the rebrand project Mara had been assigned to. The previous marketing director had greenlit it before his abrupt departure, but Blake saw no value in softening their image. Ramsey hotels catered to the elite, and that exclusivity was their brand. He had sent a company-wide memo. The project was dead, yet here she was. He cleared his throat, and Mara jumped, her hand flying to her chest as she spun around in her chair. "Mr. Ramsey," she breathed, her cheeks flushing. "I did not hear you come in, clearly." He stepped into the room, his Italian leather shoes silent against the carpeted floor. "It is almost midnight. Why are you still here?" Mara straightened, tucking her hair behind her ears. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, nothing like the polished corporate armor most of his employees donned. "I was finishing something. The rebrand campaign I canceled." Her jaw tightened, but she met his gaze without flinching. "Yes." Blake felt a flicker of irritation. "I made myself clear. That project is not worth pursuing." "With respect, sir, I think you are wrong." No one spoke to him like that. His board members hedged their words. His executives nodded along. Even his few friends knew better than to challenge him on business decisions. "Excuse me." Mara stood, crossing her arms. She was petite, barely reaching his shoulder, but there was steel in her spine. The data shows that luxury travel is shifting. Younger demographics want authenticity alongside elegance. Our current branding alienates an entire generation of potential guests who have significant spending power. If we do not adapt, we will lose market share to competitors who are already pivoting. Blake studied her. She was 26 according to her file, freshly promoted from an entry-level position because her campaign ideas had increased bookings at their Boston location by 18%. He had reviewed her work himself before approving the promotion, impressed by her instincts. But instinct was not enough. "And you think you know better than I do about my own company?" His voice was cold, the tone that made executives sweat. "I think I know the data," she said quietly, "and I think dismissing it because it does not fit your vision is a mistake." For a long moment they stared at each other. Blake should have fired her on the spot. Insubordination was not something he tolerated, but something in her conviction stopped him. "Show me," he said finally. "You have 15 minutes." Mara blinked, surprise flickering across her face before she nodded. "Okay." She pulled up her presentation, and Blake sat on the edge of the nearest desk as she walked him through her research. She had surveyed thousands of guests, analyzed competitor strategies, and created mock-ups of a refreshed brand identity that maintained Ramsey Hotel's sophistication while feeling more approachable. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, passion bleeding through her professional delivery. When she finished, Blake was silent. He hated that she was right. Everything she had shown him made sense, backed by hard numbers and thoughtful analysis. but admitting he had been wrong, that he had almost missed an opportunity because of his own stubbornness, scraped against his pride. "Send me the full report," he said, standing. "I will review it over the weekend." Mara's eyes widened. "Really? Don't make me regret this." He walked toward the door, then paused. "And Ellis?" "Yes, go home. No project is worth collapsing from exhaustion." He did not wait for her response, disappearing into the hallway before she could see the slight smile tugging at his mouth. Over the following weeks, Blake found himself noticing Mara more. He approved her rebrand project with modifications, and she threw herself into the work with relentless energy. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, her desk perpetually cluttered with notes and samples. She brought the same passion to every task, whether it was a major campaign or a minor detail, and it was infectious. The marketing team rallied around her, energized by her enthusiasm, but it was more than her work ethic that caught his attention. Mara had a way of moving through the office that felt different from everyone else. She remembered birthdays, asked about people's families, and never walked past someone who looked stressed without offering help. She laughed easily, a bright sound that seemed to lift the entire floor's mood. Blake watched from his glass-walled office as she celebrated a colleague's promotion with cupcakes she had baked herself. She was genuine in a way that felt foreign to him, untouched by the cynicism that coated his world. He told himself it was just observation. He was studying what made her effective, nothing more. But he could not explain why his pulse quickened when she walked into meetings, or why he found excuses to stop by the marketing floor. One evening, he was working late when his assistant buzzed him. "Mr. Ramsey, Mara Ellis is here to see you. She says it is important." Blake frowned. "Send her in." Mara entered looking agitated, her usual composure cracked. "I am sorry to bother you, but I need to talk to you about something. Sit." She perched on the edge of the chair across from his desk. "It is about the rebrand launch. I found an error in the print materials. The color calibration is wrong on all the brochures. They were supposed to be a warm ivory, but they printed as stark white. It changes the entire feel." Blake leaned back. "How many were printed?" 50,000. "And the cost to reprint? $42,000. Her voice was tight. "It was my mistake. I approved the proofs too quickly." He watched her wrestle with the admission, her hands clenched in her lap. Most employees would have tried to deflect blame or downplay the error. She was offering herself up for the consequences. "What do you propose we do?" he asked. She looked up, surprised. "Reprint them. The launch is in 3 weeks. We have time, but barely." "That comes out of your department's budget." "I know," she swallowed. "I will make it work." Blake tapped his fingers against his desk, considering. "Reprint them. But I want you to personally oversee the entire process. No more rushing through approvals." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. I promise it will not happen again. See that it does not." As she stood to leave, he added, "Mara," she turned back. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is how you handle them." He paused. "You did well tonight." Her smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Thank you, Mr. Ramsey." After she left, Blake sat in the silence of his office and wondered when he had started thinking of her as Mara instead of Ellis. The rebrand launch was a success. The event was held at their flagship New York hotel, a glittering affair with industry press, influencers, and high-profile guests. Blake gave the opening remarks, but it was Mara's presentation that captivated the audience. She spoke with confidence and warmth, articulating the vision behind the refresh in a way that felt both aspirational and attainable. Afterward, Blake found her on the terrace, alone and staring out at the city lights. "Hiding from your own party?" he asked, stepping beside her. She laughed softly, "Just catching my breath. It is overwhelming. You should be proud. You pulled this off beautifully." Mara turned to him, and in the soft glow of the string lights overhead, she looked radiant. "I could not have done it without your support. Thank you for believing in me." Something shifted in Blake's chest, a sensation he could not name. They were standing too close, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and floral. Her eyes searched his face, and for a moment he forgot they were at a professional event surrounded by hundreds of people. "Blake," she said softly, and hearing his first name on her lips sent heat through his veins. He stepped back, breaking the spell. "Enjoy the evening. You earned it." He walked away before he could do something stupid, like tell her that she had been occupying his thoughts far more than was appropriate. The following Monday, Blake called Mara into his office. She arrived looking curious but relaxed. The tension from the launch weekend finally eased from her shoulders. "I need you on a project," he said without preamble. "I am acquiring a boutique hotel chain in Europe, 6 properties across France, Italy, and Spain. I want you to lead the integration of their branding into the Ramsey portfolio." Mara's eyebrows shot up. "That is a huge responsibility. You are capable of it. It would require traveling to each location." "I am aware." Blake slid a folder across the desk. "Full details are inside. You would be gone for 6 weeks, starting next month. If you are not interested, I can find someone else." She picked up the folder, flipping through the pages. He watched her process the information, saw the moment excitement overtook hesitation. "I am interested," she said firmly. "Good. I will be accompanying you for part of the trip to meet with the previous owners and finalize some details." Her eyes snapped to his. "You are coming. Is that a problem?" "No, of course not. I did not expect that." Blake had not expected it either. He had a dozen executives who could handle those meetings. But the thought of Mara spending 6 weeks abroad without him felt wrong in a way he did not want to examine too closely. "Be ready to leave April 15th, he said, dismissing her before she could ask questions he did not want to answer. The month leading up to the trip was a blur of preparation. Mara coordinated with the European teams, studied the properties, and created detailed integration plans. Blake watched her juggle the massive project with her usual grace, and his respect for her deepened. But so did something else. He found himself manufacturing reasons to work with her directly, calling her into his office for updates he could have received via email, joining conference calls he normally would have delegated. He was playing with fire, and he knew it. Blake had built his empire by keeping emotions out of business. Relationships were distractions, weaknesses that could be exploited. He had watched too many powerful men crumble because they let their personal lives interfere with their judgment. He had sworn he would never be that foolish. Yet every time Mara walked into a room, his carefully constructed walls trembled. The night before their departure, Blake could not sleep. He stood in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, nursing a glass of whiskey and trying to convince himself that this trip was a terrible idea. He should send someone else. He should maintain professional distance. He should stop thinking about the way her eyes lit up when she was excited about an idea, or how her laugh made something in his chest ache. He downed the whiskey and poured another. Too late now. They flew first class to Paris, and Blake tried to focus on work during the flight. But Mara was animated, pressing her face to the window and pointing out landmarks as they approached Charles de Gaulle. It was her first time in Europe, and her joy was palpable. "Have you been to Paris before?" she asked as they settled into the car service. "Many times, for business, always for business." She looked at him with something like pity. "That is a shame. This city deserves to be savored, not just rushed through." Blake had no response to that. He had been to dozens of countries, stayed in the finest hotels, eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants, but he could not remember the last time he had simply enjoyed any of it. Their hotel was in the 6th arrondissement, a small luxury property with old-world charm. The previous owner, an elegant Frenchwoman named Madame Beaumont, greeted them personally. "Monsieur Ramsey, what a pleasure," she said, kissing both his cheeks. "And this must be Mademoiselle Ellis. Please call me Mara." Madame Beaumont smiled warmly. "You have excellent taste, Monsieur Ramsey. She is lovely." Blake felt his neck heat. "She is my marketing director." "Of course," Madame Beaumont said, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Come, let me show you the property." The tour was extensive. Madame Beaumont had owned the hotel for 40 years and knew every corner intimately. She spoke about each room with affection, sharing stories of notable guests and memorable moments. Mara listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and taking detailed notes. Blake found himself watching Mara more than the hotel. She moved through the spaces with an almost reverent care, running her fingers along antique furnishings and pausing to admire original artwork. She understood instinctively what made the place special, and he could already see her mind working on how to honor that in the rebrand. That evening, Madame Beaumont insisted they join her for dinner at a nearby bistro. It was small and intimate, the kind of place locals frequented. They sat at a corner table, and Madame Beaumont regaled them with stories about Paris in her youth. "Love and business, they are not so different," she said at one point, gesturing with her wine glass. "Both require passion, commitment, and the courage to take risks." "I am not sure I agree," Blake said. "Business is logical, love is chaos." Madame Beaumont laughed. "You say that like chaos is a bad thing. Some of the most beautiful things in life are chaotic, non." Mara was smiling, her cheeks flushed from wine. "I think she has a point." "You would," Blake muttered, but there was no heat in it. After dinner, they walked back to the hotel through streets slick with spring rain. Mara tilted her face up to the drizzle, laughing. "This is perfect," she said. "You are getting soaked. I don't care. When will I ever be in Paris in the rain again?" Blake pulled off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. She looked up at him, surprise and something warmer flashing across her face. "Thank you," she said softly. They walked in silence, the city humming around them. Blake's hand brushed hers once, twice, and on the third time her fingers caught his. It was brief, just a moment before she pulled away, but it sent electricity up his arm. This was dangerous. He knew it. But standing there in the rain-soaked streets of Paris with Mara beside him, Blake could not bring himself to care. Over the next 2 weeks, they visited each property. Blake handled the business negotiations while Mara worked with the local teams on integration plans. They fell into an easy rhythm, sharing meals and debriefing each evening over wine. Blake learned things about her that had never come up in the office. She had grown up in a small town in Oregon, the middle child of 5. Her father was a high school teacher, her mother a nurse. She had paid her own way through college, working 3 jobs while maintaining a perfect GPA. She loved old movies, terrible reality television, and spicy food that made her eyes water. She wanted to travel the world, write a book someday, and eventually settle down somewhere with a garden. "What about you?" she asked one night in Barcelona. They were sitting on the rooftop terrace of their hotel, the Mediterranean stretching out before them. "What do you want, Blake?" He considered the question. "I have everything I want." That is a deflection. It is the truth. Mara turned to face him fully. "You have money and power and success, but what do you want? If you could have anything, regardless of logic or strategy or business sense, what would it be?" No one had ever asked him that. Blake looked at her, this woman who had somehow slipped past every defense he had built, and the truth rose in his throat. "I don't know," he said finally. I have spent so long building the empire that I forgot to think about what comes after. She reached out and squeezed his hand. It is never too late to figure it out. Her touch lingered and Blake made a decision. Have dinner with me tomorrow, not a business dinner, just us. Mara's breath caught. Blake, if you are not interested, say so now. But I need you to know that this trip has been the best 2 weeks I have had in years, and it has nothing to do with hotels or branding. He held her gaze. It is because of you. She was quiet for so long that Blake felt panic creep in. He had miscalculated. He had ruined everything. Then she smiled, soft and genuine. Pick me up at 7. The next evening, Blake took her to a small restaurant tucked away in the Gothic Quarter. They ate tapas and drank Spanish wine, and for the first time in his adult life, Blake let himself be present. Not thinking about deals or strategies or the next acquisition, just there with her. Tell me something you have never told anyone, Mara said, her eyes bright in the candlelight. Blake hesitated. I am terrified of becoming irrelevant. She tilted her head. What do you mean? My whole identity is built around the company. What happens when I am no longer needed? When someone younger and smarter comes along, what am I without Ramsey Industries? Mara reached across the table and took his hand. You are brilliant, driven, and more caring than you let people see. You are someone who gave a nervous analyst a chance when you could have dismissed her. You are someone who remembers how his assistant takes her coffee and makes sure she leaves on time to pick up her kids. You are so much more than your company, Blake. You just have to let yourself see it. The knot in his chest that had been there for years loosened. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. What about you? He asked. What are you afraid of? That I will wake up one day and realize I spent my whole life working and forgot to live. She paused. That I will be too scared to take chances on things that matter. Is this a chance? Blake asked, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Yes. Are you scared? Terrified? She smiled. But I am taking it anyway. Blake leaned across the table and kissed her. It was soft and tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But when she kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his jaw, it deepened into something that felt like inevitability. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Blake rested his forehead against hers. I am not good at this, he admitted. Relationships, emotions, all of it, I will probably mess up. Then we will figure it out together. Mara smiled. I am pretty stubborn if you have not noticed, he laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. I may have picked up on that. They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, and when they reached Mara's door, Blake kissed her again, slower this time, savoring every second. Good night, he murmured against her lips. Good night, Blake. He forced himself to walk away, even though every instinct screamed at him to stay. This was too important to rush. Mara deserved more than a business trip romance that burned hot and fizzled out. She deserved everything. The remaining weeks in Europe were a dream. They finished the property tours and integration plans, but the trip became about more than work. Blake took Mara to the Louvre and the Colosseum. They got lost in the winding streets of Florence and shared gelato in Positano. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other in ways that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Blake had never let anyone this close. He had relationships before, brief and transactional arrangements that ended when they became inconvenient. But with Mara, he wanted more. He wanted mornings and midnights. He wanted her laugh and her arguments and the way she challenged him to be better. He was falling in love with her, and it scared him senseless. On their last night in Rome, they stood in front of the Trevi Fountain, surrounded by tourists and street musicians. Make a wish, Mara said, pressing a coin into his hand. Blake looked at the coin, then at her. I already have everything I need. She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Just do it. He tossed the coin over his shoulder and it disappeared into the fountain with a soft splash. Mara did the same, her face scrunched in concentration. "What did you wish for?" Blake asked. "If I tell you, it will not come true." "I am not sure I believe in wishes." "Then why did you throw the coin?" "Because you asked me to," Blake thought. "Because I would do just about anything you asked." "Humor," he said instead. Mara laughed and took his hand. "Come on. I want to see the Pantheon before we leave tomorrow." They walked through the ancient streets and Blake memorized every detail. The way the streetlights caught her hair, the warmth of her hand in his, the sound of her voice as she read historical plaques aloud. He wanted to hold on to this moment forever, before reality crashed back in. Back in New York, everything should have been easier. But instead, Blake felt the weight of their situation settle over him like a lead blanket. Mara worked for him. Dating her was a minefield of potential complications. Office policies, power dynamics, professional reputations, all of it threatened to crush what they had built. He tried to maintain distance at work, keeping their interactions professional, but it was torture. Every meeting where he had to treat her like just another employee grated against his nerves. Every evening they spent apart felt wrong. 2 weeks after their return, Mara showed up at his apartment unannounced. Blake opened the door to find her standing there, arms crossed and eyes blazing. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past him into the living room. "Mara, what are you doing here?" "What are we doing, Blake?" She spun to face him. "You have barely spoken to me since we got back. You avoid me at work. You have not called or texted. If you regret what happened in Europe, just tell me. It is not that simple." "Yes, it is." Her voice cracked. "Do you want to be with me or not?" Blake ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling over. "Of course I want to be with you, but have you thought about the consequences? The gossip, the accusations that you slept your way to success, the way it will undermine everything you have worked for." "I don't care about gossip." "Well, you should." He was pacing now, the words spilling out. "I have seen what happens when personal relationships interfere with business. It destroys careers, ruins reputations. You are brilliant, Mara. You have a future in this industry. I will not be the reason you lose that." She stared at him and he watched comprehension dawn on her face. "This is not about protecting me. This is about you being afraid. That is not fair." "Isn't it?" She stepped closer. "You told me you were scared of being irrelevant, but what you are really afraid of is being vulnerable. You have spent your entire life building walls, and the second someone gets close, you push them away." "I am trying to do the right thing." "The right thing is being honest about how you feel." Her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I am not asking you to choose between me and your company. I am asking you to choose to be happy. But if you cannot do that, if you would rather hide behind excuses and fear, then tell me now so I can move on." Blake felt like he had been punched in the chest. She was right, about all of it. He had been so focused on protecting himself, on maintaining control, that he was throwing away the best thing that had ever happened to him. "I am falling in love with you," he said, the words torn from somewhere deep inside. "And it terrifies me because I have never felt this way about anyone. I do not know how to do this, how to be what you need." Mara's expression softened. She closed the distance between them and took his face in her hands. "You do not have to be perfect, Blake. You just have to be honest, with me and with yourself." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I am sorry, I am an idiot." "Yes, you are." But she was smiling against his chest. "What are we going to do?" Blake pulled back enough to look at her. "We are going to do this right. Tomorrow I am talking to HR about our relationship. We will follow every policy, disclose everything. And if people talk, let them. You earned your position. Anyone who says otherwise will answer to me." "That is very dramatic." "I am a dramatic person." Mara laughed, the sound washing over him like absolution. "Okay, we will figure it out." Blake kissed her then, pouring every ounce of feeling he had been holding back into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Stay tonight," he said. "No more running, no more fear, just us." "Okay," she whispered. They moved to the couch, wrapped around each other, and talked until the early hours of the morning. About their fears and hopes, about what a relationship between them would look like, about the future they could build together. Blake felt lighter than he had in years, like he had finally set down a burden he had been carrying his whole life. The next morning, Blake met with HR and legal. He disclosed his relationship with Mara, confirmed that it had begun after their European trip, and requested a formal review of their working relationship to ensure no conflict of interest. He also announced that he would be promoting Mara to Director of Brand Strategy, a position that would report to the CMO instead of directly to him. The promotion was something he had been planning anyway. Mara's work on the rebrand and European integration had proven her capabilities beyond doubt. But doing it now, publicly and through proper channels, sent a clear message. Her career advancement was based on merit, not their relationship. When he called Mara into his office to tell her, she looked stunned. "Director of Brand Strategy? You have earned it. This is not about us, Mara. This is about your work." She bit her lip, fighting a smile. "My mother is going to lose her mind. In a good way, the best way." She paused. "Thank you, Blake, for everything. Thank you for not giving up on me." Over the following months, they navigated their relationship with care. There was gossip, of course. Whispers in break rooms and speculation on industry blogs. But Blake made it clear through his actions and words that anyone who questioned Mara's qualifications would face consequences. And Mara proved herself over and over, leading campaigns that increased bookings and brand recognition across all their properties. They kept their work and personal lives as separate as possible. At the office, they were professional and respectful. But outside those walls, they built something real. Blake met her family, a chaotic and loving crew who welcomed him with open arms despite their initial wariness about his wealth. Mara charmed his small circle of friends, and even won over his intimidating lawyer. Blake learned what it meant to be in a partnership, to consider someone else's needs and desires alongside his own, to compromise and communicate and show up even when it was uncomfortable. Mara was patient with him, calling him out when he retreated into old patterns but never giving up on him. 6 months after they returned from Europe, Blake took Mara to the flagship hotel in New York where they had launched the rebrand. They walked out onto the same terrace where he had almost kissed her for the first time. "You remember that night?" he asked, taking her hand. "Of course." "You ran away from me. I was an idiot. We have established this." She was smiling, her eyes bright in the string lights. Blake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Mara's breath caught. "I spent most of my life convinced that success was enough, that building an empire would fill whatever was missing inside me." He opened the box, revealing a simple platinum ring with a single perfect diamond. "But you showed me that I was wrong. Success means nothing without someone to share it with. You challenge me, support me, and make me want to be better. You stayed when I gave you every reason to leave. You saw past my walls and loved me anyway." Tears were streaming down Mara's face now. "Mara Ellis, will you marry me?" "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." Blake slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her, the city sparkling around them. She was laughing and crying at the same time, and Blake felt something he had never expected to feel: complete. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony in Oregon, surrounded by family and close friends. Mara's father walked her down the aisle of the same church where her parents had married, and Blake had to blink back tears when he saw her in her simple white dress. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. They honeymooned in Bali, 2 weeks of beaches and temples and lazy mornings tangled in each other. Blake learned to surf, terribly, and Mara laughed so hard she cried watching him wipe out. They made love under mosquito nets and ate street food and talked about the life they wanted to build. "I want kids," Mara said one night, her head on his chest as they watched the sunset. "How many?" "3, maybe 4, Blake smiled. "That is a lot of chaos. You love chaos now." "I have converted you." "You have," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. When they returned to New York, they moved into a brownstone in Brooklyn that needed work but had good bones and a backyard. Mara threw herself into renovations while still excelling at her job. Blake stepped back from some of his day-to-day responsibilities, hiring a COO to handle operations while he focused on strategy and acquisitions. He was learning to live, not just work. A year after their wedding, Mara came home with a secret smile and a pregnancy test. Blake stared at the 2 pink lines, emotions overwhelming him. "We are having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are having a baby," Mara confirmed, laughing through happy tears. Their daughter, Charlotte, was born on a snowy December evening. Blake held her in the hospital room, this tiny perfect human, and felt his entire world shift. She had Mara's eyes and his dark hair, and she was the most precious thing he had ever seen. "Hi, Charlotte," he whispered. "I am your dad. I promise to do better for you than my father did for me. I promise to be present and loving, and to show you that success means nothing without people to share it with." Mara watched him with shining eyes. "You are going to be an amazing father." Blake looked at his wife and daughter, his family, and knew that she was right. Not because he had it all figured out, but because he would never stop trying. 2 years later, they had twin boys, James and Henry. The brownstone that had felt too big suddenly felt too small, filled with toys and laughter and the beautiful chaos of 3 young children. Blake converted one of the Ramsey hotels into a more family-friendly property, inspired by watching Mara struggle to find luxury accommodations that welcomed kids. The business continued to thrive, but it was no longer the center of Blake's life. His family was. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Blake and Mara returned to the Trevi Fountain in Rome, this time with 3 kids in tow. Charlotte, now 4, insisted on throwing coins for everyone. "What did you wish for?" Mara asked Blake, echoing the question from all those years ago. Blake looked at their chaotic, beautiful family and smiled. "Nothing. I have everything I need." Mara leaned up and kissed him. "Me too." That night, after they had wrestled the exhausted children into bed in their hotel suite, Blake and Mara sat on the balcony with wine and watched the city lights. "You ever regret it?" Blake asked. "Staying with me after I tried to push you away. I gave you so many reasons to leave." Mara turned to him, her expression soft but certain. "I never took any of those reasons, Blake, not one, because I saw who you really were underneath all the fear and walls, and that person was worth fighting for. I don't know what I did to deserve you. You let me in," she said simply. That was enough. Blake pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and feeling the steady beat of her heart against his. He thought about the man he had been when they met, so convinced that emotion was weakness and vulnerability was dangerous. That man would have been horrified by how much Blake's life had changed. But that man had also been profoundly lonely, even if he had never admitted it. Blake would never go back to that life. Not for all the success or money or power in the world. The next morning, they took the kids to the Colosseum. Charlotte wanted to know if there were still gladiators. The twins wanted gelato. Mara refereed squabbles while Blake carried backpacks and strollers and tried to keep everyone together. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely perfect. That evening, they had dinner at the same restaurant where Blake and Mara had shared their first real date. The owner remembered them and made a fuss over the children, bringing out special treats and pinching cheeks. Charlotte charmed everyone with her attempts at Italian. The twins made a mess. Mara laughed until she had tears in her eyes. Blake captured it all, not with a camera but with his memory. The sound of his daughter's giggles, the weight of his sons in his arms, the way Mara looked at him across the table, love and contentment radiating from her. This was what he had wished for at the fountain all those years ago, even if he had not known it at the time. Not a perfect life, but a full one. Not just success, but meaning. After dinner, they walked through the streets, Charlotte holding Blake's hand and chattering about lions and gladiators. Mara carried a sleeping James while Blake had Henry in a carrier on his chest. "I love you," Blake said quietly as they walked. Mara smiled. "I love you too. Thank you for being stubborn. Thank you for finally listening." They returned to New York a week later, back to the routines and responsibilities of daily life. Blake went to the office, but he left at 5 to have dinner with his family. He coached Charlotte's soccer team and read bedtime stories and changed diapers. He supported Mara's career as she continued to rise in the industry, eventually starting her own consulting firm when the twins started preschool. They fought sometimes, usually about stupid things like whose turn it was to do dishes or whether they could really afford another renovation project. But they always talked it through, always came back to each other. The foundation they had built was strong enough to weather storms. On their 10th anniversary, Blake surprised Mara with a trip back to Paris, just the two of them. Her parents watched the kids, and for 5 days they were just Blake and Mara again. They stayed at Madame Beaumont's old hotel, now fully integrated into the Ramsey portfolio, but still retaining its unique charm. They ate at tiny bistros and wandered through museums and made love in the middle of the afternoon with the windows open. "Do you remember what Madame Beaumont said at dinner?" Mara asked one night, curled against Blake's side. "About love and business both requiring courage. I remember." "She was right. This took courage. We took courage." Blake kissed her temple. "Best decision I ever made." They returned home to chaos. Charlotte had convinced her grandparents to let her adopt a puppy, and the twins had painted the playroom walls with washable markers. Blake looked at the mess and laughed, genuinely and deeply. "Welcome home," Mara said dryly. "Would not have it any other way." Years passed in a blur of school plays and business trips, family vacations and quiet evenings. Blake watched his children grow, each developing their own personalities and interests. Charlotte was fierce and independent, already talking about starting her own company someday. James was creative and sensitive, filling sketchbooks with elaborate drawings. Henry was pure energy, always moving and laughing and getting into trouble. Blake loved them with an intensity that still sometimes took his breath away. Mara remained his anchor through it all. His partner, his best friend, his love. She had never stopped challenging him, never stopped pushing him to be better. And he had never stopped being grateful that she had stayed all those years ago, that she had seen something in him worth fighting for. On Charlotte's 16th birthday, Blake found himself thinking about the man he had been when he met Mara. 32, successful but hollow, convinced that emotions were liabilities. That man seemed like a stranger now. "What are you thinking about?" Mara asked, finding him in the backyard watching the kids laugh around the fire pit. "How different everything is," Blake said, pulling her close. "How different I am." "You were always this person," Mara said softly. "You just needed someone to see it. You saw it." even when I gave you every reason to walk away." She tilted her face up to his. "I told you, I never took any of those reasons, not one, because you were worth it, Blake. You are still worth it." He kissed her as the sound of their children's laughter filled the air, and Blake knew with absolute certainty that this was what happiness felt like. Not the rush of closing a deal or the pride of building an empire, but this. Family, love, connection. Everything he had never known he needed until Mara showed him. The fire crackled and the stars came out, and Blake, Ramsey, held his wife and watched his children and felt profoundly, completely blessed. He had built an empire, yes. But his real legacy was here, in the family they had created together and the love they had fought for. She had stayed when he tried to push her away. She had seen through his defenses and loved him anyway. And in doing so, she had given him a life beyond his wildest dreams. That was worth more than all the money and success in the world. That was everything.